Culture A Story by Roz Wolmering. I entered the school doors brimming with ideas, innovative teaching methods, and the desire to have an effect. Today was the first day of school in Guinea-Bissau, the tiny West African country where I had been assigned as an English teacher with the Peace Corps. After completing an exhausting and demanding 12 weeks of training in language, as well as cross-cultural and technical skills, I felt more than adequately prepared for the challenge of teaching in an under-resourced school system designed on a colonial model. Even as I entered the pastel pink building, I noticed a strange absence of noise, considering it was the first day of school. A few isolated students wearing white school jackets rambled about in the dimly lit hallway. As I climbed the stairway to the administrative office, I heard a distant mango drop to the ground with a thud, and a chorus of children's voices break out in glee. Hoping to catch a glimpse of the fastest one carrying off the right prize being pursued by the others, I looked out into the schoolyard and saw instead piles of old desk fragments, broken bricks, and tree branches. They must be cleaning the school grounds, I thought to myself. When I entered the office, the principal and his assistant were looking at a class schedule posted on the wall and discussing the large number of teachers that still needed to be hired by the ministry. After greeting me warmly by inquiring about my health, my family back in America, and my life in general, they informed me that my teaching load had been increased by 8 hours since the previous week. "No problem," I joyfully responded. "I love to teach." The classroom where I was to teach was located a short walking distance behind the main building. 3 lines of classrooms were arranged in rows, much like military barracks. Since today was the first day of classes, I hopped on my bicycle and coasted right up to the door of classroom number 19, my classroom. Always wiser to be punctual and prepared than be tardy and unequipped, I told myself. 2 students were sitting inside the classroom playing cards when I entered. I looked at the official enrollment number of 47 and asked earnestly, "Where are the other 45 students?" The card players faltered a bit and then mumbled, "They'll come by and by." "Well, let's begin without them," I suggested, with a disapproving stare at the cards. They shrugged their shoulders and offered instead to go and find the students. It certainly didn't seem reasonable to me to teach 2 students and then have to teach the same material again when the others showed up later. Be flexible, I reminded myself, and so I agreed. 1 week later, there were 26 students outside my classroom still waiting for the rest of their classmates to appear, by and by. I noticed that not only were students absent, but teachers as well. Meanwhile, the principal and his assistant were still discussing the schedule on the wall, moving multicolored pins, and deliberating how best to resolve the shortage of teachers. That morning I had stopped by the administrative office again, just to make sure that I had understood correctly the radio announcement made by the Minister of Education the previous evening. I thought that he had announced that classes were in session, and was quite relieved when the principal verified my assessment. He assured me that I had understood the minister's announcement to the word, and then asked me to teach an additional 2 hours a week. Lacking the experience to rebut his statement, "When there's a lack of teachers, we all need to pitch in a few extra hours," I nodded my head in consent. Considering that I wasn't actually teaching any students at the time, 2 extra hours didn't seem to be much of a burden, and I left, feeling only the slightest premonition that I might regret it later. By the end of week 3, I had managed to convince, cajole, and beg my students to enter the classroom. What other teachers did was their decision, I figured, but as for me, I was itching to do something other than wait on shore like a seafarer's wife. Once the students had entered, I discovered to my amazement that I couldn't get them to quiet down. Heedless of my request to pay attention, they continued to socialize. Daisy painted her nails and chatted with Aminata about the new discotheque called Temptation that had just opened across from the mosque. Bebe took Nanda's notebook and wouldn't return it. Fatu gave me the peace sign and went outside to urinate. A few others followed. Students wandered in late with irrelevant excuses like, "It's hot," or "I'm tired." Nelson and Marcelino held competitive jive talks while their classmates gathered around, encouraging first one and then the other. Other students, whose teachers were absent, hung around the open windows, throwing crumpled up bits of paper to their friends. Others simply came to stare at me, a white woman who rode a bicycle to school. They shoved up against the outside wall, clambered over each other's backs, and stuck their heads in for a peek, yelling, white woman, there she is!" The next day, still more window students appeared to torment me. Such behavior continued daily, and eventually I began to yell at them, "Get away from the windows!" and resorted to pushing them out of viewing range. After 1 month at my new post, I reigned over 30 hours a week of complete disorder in a pseudo-classroom kingdom. This is madness, I thought. For the next month, I devoted the first 20 minutes of class solely to establishing order and quiet. I was determined. I did this with gentle coaxes at first, but gradually evolved to using threats. "I'll call the school disciplinarian," and offering sweet enticement. "If you're good, I'll let you out early." Late students were not allowed to enter, regardless of their excuses. It seemed the only way to control the chaos. Once I had my students' attention, I made them copy page after page of notes from the blackboard in their notebooks. I planned to inundate their minds with grammar rules and vocabulary lists so they wouldn't have time to talk. Other times I made them repeat sentences in unison, as if they were Berlitz parrots. Audiolingual theorists suggest that language is acquired through repetition of recurring patterns, a proposition effectively demonstrated when I overheard my students mimicking me. "Be quiet! Go sit down!" When the drudgery of memorization and repetition bored even me to death, I resorted to playing bingo, Simon Says, or do the hokey pokey. I went to elaborate lengths to make nifty prizes for positive reinforcement, and spent numerous hours designing creative educational posters to hang on the walls. For a time, I concentrated on visual stimulation and drama to reinforce right brain learning. But the posters disappeared overnight, and the drama idea erupted one day during a production of a local folktale. I rather enjoyed their drama productions myself, and I figured they were reviewing English grammar and vocabulary by playing the games. But deep inside arose a persistent, nagging voice. "Surely you can do more than babysit." Gradually, as my disciplinary measures evolved to resemble boot camp philosophy, my classes began to develop a catatonic personality. Somber students stared back at me or out into space. Apathy replaced the boisterous noise I had become accustomed to combating. They refused to open their notebooks until I had repeated the request 3 times. Orders and instructions mollified them, sure enough, but now they didn't seem to have opinions, concerns, or even interests. Some simply put their heads down and slept. Sit and listen they did, but participate and discuss and collaborate they didn't. I wrote in letters to my friends back home that paper plates had more personality than these kids. Their passive resistance soon infuriated me, and I yelled in frustration at them, "I am here to help you! Don't you understand that?" They stared at me in a dazed disbelief. "What do you want?" I implored them with open hands. "Do you want me to entertain you? To treat you like military recruits? To punish you?" They shrugged their shoulders and sighed. Teacher, we are pitiful. That's life. Go, I told them. Go home. Get out. They refused, of course. Against my usually discerning judgment, I finally called in the school disciplinarian. The moment he arrived, every single student in the classroom jumped up on tiptoes to attention. They greeted him in perfect unison with the resounding, "Good morning, Mr. Disciplinarian." When he ordered them to sit down, an immaculate silence spread throughout the classroom like a divine fog. I was astounded. They looked so serene and innocent as they waited attentively for his words. Their pristine, woeful eyes and composure made them appear as mere harmless babes, and I began to imagine that they would convince him of their purity, and that I was the evil abuser. I began to wonder, in fact, if this wasn't perhaps partially true. The disciplinarian picked out several students who were not wearing school jackets. In addition, he selected students who were wearing jackets but had not buttoned the top button. He accused and convicted them of intent to belittle their American teacher and expelled them for 2 weeks, dismissing them with a disparaging comment. He then read a list of 7 students' names. Since these students had registered for classes but had not yet paid their school fees, he expelled them for the year, adding yet another insult as they crept out of the classroom. He then turned to me and said, "If any one of these students ever gives you a problem, even the smallest problem, you tell me, and I will expel the entire class for the entire year. Not one of them will pass, and they will all have to repeat the year next year." As I struggled to come up with an appropriate response to his comment, he turned back to the students, held up one finger, and challenged them. "Just one of you try it. Just one, and I'll whip your butt." He left, but not before making an attempt to reassure me with a vindictive smile. I stood in horrified shock and embarrassment. I had just lost 13 students. The students said nothing. They stared at me and waited to see what I would do next. I felt angry and stupid and offered a feeble apology. I fumed all the way home. That night I dreaded ever going back into the classroom again. I contemplated terminating my Peace Corps service and going home. I was sure I could find a justifiable excuse to allow myself a graceful exit. It was now the 3rd month of teaching, and quarterly grades were due in 10 days. All I had managed to teach were 2 review units. 2 review units! My God! I realized looking at their grades. Most of these students couldn't even meet the standards of the previous year's curriculum. How did they manage to pass? I was tempted to flunk them all myself this time around, but what would that accomplish? I looked in dismay at the stack of 25 lesson plans I had diligently prepared during the late night hours of the past 2 months, and realized that I would never implement them. So I switched strategies. That night I drew up a no more list. No more colorful visual aids to catch their attention. No more fancy vocabulary and grammar handouts for them to grab eagerly. No more games and no more prizes. No more school disciplinarian to resolve the ongoing state of classroom crisis either. My next unit began with the following dialogue. Teacher, I am angry. I cannot teach because you do not respect me. The students. No, no, teacher, please. Teacher, please. Teacher, I don't want to teach you. I'm leaving. Students. No, teacher, no. Please, teacher. You see, you don't understand our situation. Teacher. Well, tell me, just what is your situation? This time, the dialogue was theirs to complete and resolve.